Hello, RailsConf, and welcome to my talk on developer empathy. My name is Tyrrell. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm an instructor at the Turing School of Software and Design. First off, let's start with a little humility. I'm not an expert at this. I'm working at this every day. I'm working to instill the concept of developer empathy in the developers that I have the privilege of training and guiding at Turing. I don't know everything, but I've learned quite a bit over the course of my career. I'm here to share those experiences with you. The engineering world that I've been privileged enough to be a part of lacks even a basic understanding of what developer empathy looks like, and engineering leaders and developers at large need a framework. They need actionable steps that they can implement to address this. So, who am I? As you know, I'm an instructor at Turing School, so I'm an educator. Attended Turing as a student in 2017 and 2018. It overlapped a little bit, and it really changed my life for the better. So now I work as an instructor there, where the most important aspect of my job as an educator is to create a space that is centered around inclusive teaching practices and psychological safety. More on psychological safety to come. So at Turing, we teach foundational concepts in Ruby. We teach, object-oriented programming. Then once the students have a foundational knowledge of OOP within Ruby, then we transition to Rails, get into application development. And really what we're trying to do is help students land their first job and either change their careers or begin their careers as developers. We are the first code school to become accredited. Shout out us. Yeah, and then also at Turing, I also write some software for our internal apps, but really not enough time, not enough to give a technical talk of any really interest at this time. I think the last thing that I worked on was switching a couple steps in our state machine. Yeah, not incredibly interesting or worth your time. But also, I'm a former Manny, so used to babysit children. Yeah. This is not all that I am. I am more than just my job title. I am more than just what I do for work. I'm a partner. I'm a snowboarder. I like to think of this when I think of myself snowboarding, although this photo was taken many years ago and there is less send happening now when I snowboard. I'm also a dog dad. I am a history enthusiast. So I have, quite a few interests outside of work. I just want to make sure that we're thinking of me as not just what I do for work, but we're thinking of me as a whole person. Not simply my job title, neither are you, and neither are your coworkers. Speaking of my dog, Frankie, this is a photo of her. She's a dog, also a political strategist. This was an important photo, helping us get a yes vote on 2J, which reverted the ban on pit bulls in Denver. So well done, Frank. So yeah, let's talk a little bit more about my identity in particular. I have identity markers of power and extreme privilege. I'm white. I'm a man, cisgender, heterosexual, neurotypical, college degree, and I'm an instructor. All right. And so it's important to recognize the traditional student teacher power dynamics that I have in place, or that I should say that are in place in my classroom just by default. I have control over student outcomes, which is going to create a constant power dynamic that must be recognized and navigated with grace. My own privilege mixed with the power of traditional student-teacher dynamics within Western society creates a lopsided and intimidating environment on day one of my classes that I must work to dismantle every time we step into the classroom. And that's something I continue to work on. That's something I'm aware of. And that's something that is important when we talk about this concept of developer empathy, because I need to know that my students, day one, are feeling somewhat inferior and somewhat intimidated. So it's my job to recognize that power that I have in there and seed that power back to those students. Thinking more about developer empathy and this idea of psychological safety. So researcher, professor, and author Amy Edmondson introduced the term psychological safety in June of '99, defined as a shared belief held by members of a team that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. All right, so I would build upon this to say, in a team where psychological safety is present, curiosity is welcomed and rewarded. Teams are more interested in getting it right rather than being right. We're taught in these teams to welcome and embrace failure as part of a greater learning process. And psychological safety is a byproduct of continuous empathetic behavior between individuals on a team. Researcher, public speaker, best-selling author, Dr. Brené Brown says that empathy fuels connection and sympathy drives disconnection. So what does that mean? The idea of empathy as opposed to sympathy, oh, I feel bad. That's too bad that that's happening to you. Empathy is feeling with people. I have been there before. I imagine that what you're feeling is tough. It is discomfort. And I'm willing to sit in this discomfort with you. I'm not going to make this about me, but I'm just going to say, I know this is hard for you. I'm here for you. I'm here to support you. It's a vulnerable choice to venture into the space that another person is in and sit supportively with them. We also need boundaries that are clearly defined between people in a working relationship. We have to think like empathy is not finding another person at work to commiserate with. That's not actually empathy. That's not actually productive. But instead, it's the willingness to feel with someone else, no matter how they're feeling. Specifically when they're feeling maybe feelings of pain or discomfort. Best-selling author, founding director of American University's Anti-Racist Research and Policy Center, Dr. Ibram Kendi, he said in a 2019 interview, I do think it's critical for people who are white to be able to understand the way racism operates from the perspective of people of color. Obviously, it's difficult to really think about things from the standpoint of other people, but like with anything else, that's what allows people to be empathetic. Now, I'm not saying that it's going to be easy for you to look at someone's perspective that's different than yours, understand what they're saying, and really attempt to feel how they're feeling. But just because it's difficult does not mean we don't try. You know, of course it's difficult to imagine someone's experience, specifically if we don't share an identity marker as important as race. One of the first steps is to recognize an unavoidable gap in our understanding and work to listen to people that don't share our identity markers in order to fill that gap. In order to really understand another person's truth, another person's pain, another person's experience in the world, we need to first accept their truth as the truth, specifically when it differs from our own experience. Organizational psychologist, Professor Adam Grant says, empathy is not a hardwired trait. It's a soft skill you can develop with hard work. Great, that's encouraging. That means I can do this too. You can do this too. He also says, one of the things that you can do is you can ask people what their biggest challenge is. And you can pay attention to what causes them pain. This shows that you care about them. To build on that, I will say this idea that I employ in the classroom quite a bit is meet people where they're at. I don't know where they're coming from that day. They might have a ton of stuff going on outside of my classroom, but it's my job to meet them where they're at that day. It's my job to listen to their experience, their truth, the truth. It's my job to seek understanding and avoid judgment. Easier said than done, but we're working on it. I need to be willing to sit with them in their space of discomfort, of failure, and say, this is okay, we're going to get through this together. I'm here to support you, so that they know that they matter to me. And I need to be able to do this with boundaries. What's on the line here, right? What can we expect to gain or lose via developer empathy that is in practice or developer empathy that is lacking? So here's what we can gain: retention, trust, increased productivity, this idea of exponential growth, which I'll build on a little bit in another section. Also, a reliable code base, right? If we start putting some of these practices into place, our code is going to look better. It's going to be more sturdy. It's going to stand the test of time. And it's going to be changeable when inevitably someone comes along and needs to change it. The greatest thing I think that we can achieve via developer empathy is psychological safety. And a team that feels psychologically safe is going to be more creative and is going to be more productive than how it would be if a team is not willing to take risks and is not willing to accept that failure is part of this process. On the flip side, here's what the work environment can look like without developer empathy. We've got our favorite buzzword in this industry, burnout. But that's not all. We could have gossip happening between team members about another member of the team. Not productive, doesn't help. Silence, I would say one of the worst things. People have things to say, they don't feel like they can say them. Power struggles, that's something that we'll see between teams that aren't willing to take risks and support one another. A lack of accountability, blame and shame, stagnation, and ultimately a more brittle code base, a code base that will not stand the test of time because these teams are not writing code in an empathetic way. What does this look like in practice? And I'll start with a story from my own classroom. One of the first things to do here is acknowledge my own power. I'm a white man. My experiences are limited based on those identity markers. I haven't experienced much, really any racism, sexism, etc. My identity is backed by structural and systemic power in the US and throughout most of the world. As I said before, my job is to cede power to my students in order to foster psychological safety and collaboration. I need to do this intentionally, and I need to do this often. One of the ways that we tell students to kind of view our classroom is I'm the team lead. Yeah, I have more experience, but no, I will not always have the right answer. And I'm most interested in us collectively getting it right rather than personally being right. One of the things that I say in my class is I need to explicitly state expectations. So some of those expectations that I state are, I expect to fail here. I expect you to fail here. I expect us to collectively fail here. This is a place where curious failures are rewarded. So how do I reward failures? Well, I thank students for the engagement from question to question and at the end of every lesson. I remind students that the data shows that retention of subject matter for them will be higher if they offer a wrong answer first. And so I encourage them to do so. Even if you're not totally sure that this is the right answer, offer up what you think it might be. And one of the main things that I do is I consistently say, I don't know when I don't know. So being comfortable with what I know allows me to reveal, and really being comfortable with what I don't know, that allows me to reveal my process for gathering and applying knowledge, which, as we know, is a key component of the problem solving required in this industry. Another expectation that I set is this space is meant to be collaborative. We thank one another for asking questions that address gaps in either our understanding or gaps in the lesson plan itself. We don't interrupt one another in this space. We listen intently. We repeat questions back to one another to clarify, and we offer encouragement whether we got it right or whether we are in the process of getting it right. I think that this is an intentional process that needs to be explicit. And in this Zoom environment, it is so easy to talk over one another, to interrupt, to kind of lose that human connection. So we have to be more intentional now that the world has shifted and we've gone remote. And another expectation of mine is explicit expectation is no matter the identity markers of my students, Black, brown, indigenous, white, LGBTQ, women, non-binary, men, those that speak English as a second language. This space was created with you in mind. It is my job as an educator to help you thrive here. If I see something like a microaggression, or maybe even something more than that, a blatant threat to your psychological safety here, I'm going to call that out in the moment to correct it as an ally. I have implicit bias as well. I'm not free of that. I could certainly be guilty of a microaggression myself. And when I am, please call it out. This space becomes more inclusive when you do this, and I get better as an educator. I know I'm certainly not perfect, but I am on a lifelong journey of anti-racism, anti-sexism, and equitable teaching practices. So I welcome feedback, and I welcome the idea that I might get it wrong so that I can eventually get it right. Speaking of feedback, I think of feedback here as it's a two-way street in my classroom, and really I view it as a gift, and I hope that students do too. So student code and student processes will be critiqued by us. They'll be critiqued quite a bit, and we encourage the students to critique our classroom environment and the presentation of material. We need to know which topics or ideas are causing confusion before we can properly address them. Our lessons should be consistently iterated on and improved. We always want students to know we're actively listening to their questions and we value their input. So one of the things that I can do to better understand what students need from me is I can ask students, hey, what does support look like from me to you during this current module? I would expect, I should also say, thank you, Brene Brown. I should expect that support for individual students should and will look different. Students should have the chance to learn from and connect with instructors that share some of their identity markers. All the instructors shouldn't just look like me. They should have a choice to share with those instructors and to connect with those instructors in both check-ins and one-on-ones. And so one of the things that we do is we allow students the autonomy to decide which instructor they'd like to check in with, which instructor they'd like to have a one-on-one with, or as we call them, squishies. So how can we know what a student's specific need is unless we invite them to share that with us? We need to set up clear boundaries with students as part of our expectation setting. You can tell me anything. I'm going to listen intently. You can tell me nothing. That's okay too. That's your choice. If you do tell me something, I may not be the best person to support you in all situations. However, I'll be happy to connect you with the person that can best support you if that person isn't me. Class structures are going to need to change in order to provide independent study time, Q&A time, group work time, synthesis time, and resolution time. Classes should be malleable, specifically now that we are in this remote space. They should take many forms and support a multitude of learning styles because not everyone is going to learn the same at the same pace. How could we expect a room full of 30 students, all at different levels of technical ability, to really get the most out of watching me code for an hour? Who knows? Maybe they get stuck and they can't continue. Maybe they have already done this lesson ahead of time or have already learned about this concept on their own, and now they're forced to kind of just watch me do something that they already know how to do. Right? We have to think clearly and intentionally about how we're using this space and really meeting them where they're at. This is Turing's mission statement, and what I just described and how I'm setting up my classroom is how I hope to work towards this mission statement every day. So to transition a little bit, thinking about what this can look like on a development team. Yeah, I really enjoy this quote. What does support look like for you? And that also forces us a little bit to think about If I'm the person being asked this question, what does support look like for me? How do I thrive? How do I work best? What do I need from my manager? What do I need from my teammates? Questions that I should spend some time considering and trying to learn more about and learn more about myself. We're going to start top down because that is the way that organizational culture is set. Doesn't work bottom up, never will, never can. And we're going to talk about, as a person of power within the organization, how can you encourage and how can you inspire developer empathy throughout the engineering team? So what can engineering leaders do? One of the first steps is to recognize your power, to define the team culture. Whether you're a manager, director, VP, culture is set top down. And you have to remember that the team will reflect the values that you practice, not the values that you say you practice. So some of the ways that you can do this is you can recognize your own implicit bias and the limits of your perspective. Accept this truth. State this truth for all to hear. You can hire a diverse team that can add experiences and perspectives you don't have. This is essential to building productive teams. The data is out there. And since most of you are developers, I encourage you to Google for it. I would encourage you to stop hiring people that look like you because it's easy and comfortable. Bring in a diverse team to be part of the hiring process to help you recognize and, to the extent possible, diverge from your own bias. It's really key to refining your processes, your products, your ideals, and ideas. Diversity is the key. Another thing I would encourage, don't ignore the world outside of work. It matters. And your employees, your teammates, they're paying attention to your reaction. Every time a tragic or frightening event that causes trauma happens in the world, your teammates are wrestling with that trauma. As a leader, you must respond. In order to normalize the fact that outside stressors occur, it will affect everyone differently. Support will look different for different individuals. Some teammates, they're going to need to step away from work for a few hours or a few days. Some team members will want to work in order to help them cope and distract them, and they don't want time away. Normalize the space for these people to cope on their own terms. Offer some kind of support system from you. Again, let them know support will look different across a wide spectrum of reactions. Ask them to proactively communicate what support looks like for them in this moment. Another thing we should do, establish empathetic team norms. We curiously step into our discomfort in order to learn the most about our product, our customers, and our abilities. Set this norm for your team. We know we're going to take risks. We know that we're likely going to fail in that process of taking risks. Failure is going to be difficult to face, but it's ultimately going to yield both learning and growth for us as a team and as a company. You've got to have a we, not me attitude. Culture is defined by what we work to accomplish together and collaboratively. If you don't define this as part of the culture, this is going to get into the power struggles, the dynamics of who got credit for this, who got blamed for that. One of the things you can do is you can call out great work in public when you see it. This feature is going to deliver instant value to our customers. They've waited for it for a long time, and you all delivered. You worked hard. Thank you. An amazing job. This can be in a meeting, a Slack message that's visible to the entire team, and say, hey, I know this release was stressful, but we got it done. The team got it done, and our product is more stable than it was a week ago. I know the last few weeks have been stressful. Today, and really the next few days, take some time back for yourselves. Work on things that you've been wanting to work on, but you've been putting off. On the flip side of this, it's best to deliver critical feedback in private and make sure that it's also specific, actionable, and kind. We can tell someone that their work wasn't quite what we expected it to be without telling them that they weren't who we expected them to be. You can't allow yourself or teammates to pass judgment or blame when the team has realized a failure. As a leader, as an engineering leader, you have to lean into your own humility in order to cultivate a culture of iteration, adjustment, and ultimately learning. Remember, not needing to be right, but working to get it right. One of the ways that we do this at Turing is with survey data. One of the things that you could implement on an engineering team is you could survey towards the end of each sprint in order to understand whether members of the team are feeling empowered, included, energized, or not. I would argue that these survey questions, they need to bring awareness around DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, whether those practices are present or are lacking, because these practices are necessary for creating a space that's designed for all team members, no matter their unique identity markers. Maybe there's something you read or an experience that you had that has you thinking about how to create a more equitable learning space or implement more equitable practices within this team. Share that with the team. You could also ask some leading questions to the team. This could be part of the survey, or it could be part of, stand-up meetings that you have. Have you thought about your own power within this development team? Could you be a more inclusive team member next week? How? What are some specific examples of how you've practiced developer empathy this week? If we just ask how members are doing this, we're bringing awareness to the idea that we should be doing this, right? This is part of the norm setting. If you're struggling to think of some examples, what can you do better next week that shows that you're working on your own developer empathy? Share those examples with the team. And from an example at Turing, we give an anonymous survey with the following questions that I'll read to you once a module, so once a 6 weeks at Turing. This is something that I think certainly could be implemented by a development team if you're truly willing to hold a mirror up to yourself and you're more interested in improving DEI practices than anything else. Because if you are, then I think that this survey could do a lot of work. So we do it on a strongly agree to strongly disagree scale, and then neutral is in the middle. The questions are as follows. My voice is always heard in a group setting. I've always had the time and space to answer a question that was posed to the group. My perspective is always incorporated in group work. My ideas are valued in a group project setting or in a breakout group. I've never been interrupted while expressing my thoughts. My teammates' interactions with me always reflect positive intent. I always feel members of my team are working to include me. I've never felt that my technical ability impacted the way that my ideas were received. No one has ever questioned my ability to complete a technical task. No one has ever questioned my ability to be a software developer. Thinking about these questions, they're going to reveal a lot. The data is always pretty strong in showing you we've got some work to do here. But that is one of the first steps to doing the work and to improving upon these empathetic practices is awareness. And we have to have some awareness. This can give you that data. So I think another great thing to lead with the team as an open-ended question, you could do this weekly, you could do this as part of the survey. What could you do to create a more safe and inclusive culture in this team? Put some personal responsibility on members of the team that they are responsible for creating this space and making sure it is as inclusive as we expect it to be. Something that you can ask to other managers or other people in leadership positions. Hey, have you seen developers creating space or practicing developer empathy during meetings, reviews, pairings, or within the code itself this week? If you have, then how can we work to directly encourage this with our feedback? How do we, as a leadership team, encourage these best practices when we see them? It goes back to celebrating these wins, celebrating these accomplishments, calling them out in public. Another thing that we can do as engineering leadership, rethinking meetings, right? So Adam Grant has this book out called Think Again, Power of Rethinking. So Some of the things to consider: what time are we having these meetings? Mostly we mostly all work in a distributed work environment, or at least we have for the last year. What next year looks like, we don't all know, but that means we probably aren't all living in the same place, the same time zones. Another thing to consider is this time that we're having this meeting cutting into time when my team of developers is most productive, right? This is part of why it's so important to know when your people do their best work, because we want to leave that time free for them to do that best work. Another thing to think about with meetings is, could this information be delivered asynchronously? Can this just be a Slack message that someone can read at any time? Could this be a screencast? Could I do a quick recording for the team to give them the updates I need to, and then allow them to take those updates in and really request if they need a follow-up or not? Are these better options than actually taking the time to all of us meet in person? Things to consider. Does everyone need to be at this meeting? Who is taking up the most space at meetings? Do they all share the same identity markers of power, all the people that are speaking up? How can we work to change this if this is indeed the case? Another way that we bring awareness by asking these questions, thinking about these things. Yeah, another one to consider if you are in a position of power is, have you called a meeting to dive into a project or a planning session where you do need the whole team there, but you've only given space for your own agenda? What you think this meeting should be about, what you think this project should look like. Is there any space for your teammates to raise their concerns? If not, this is showing an acute lack of empathy. I'm sure people on your team have strong opinions, have ideas about things they're going to be working on for weeks at a time. We have to give them the space to be able to voice those concerns, to be able to voice those ideas. I think about using retros as Brene Brown puts it, as a rumble, which is where we know a lot of people are going to come into the meeting with some different perspectives. We're not all going to line up when we get to this meeting, but it's our job to get to a point where we all are on the same page, right? And it's not going to be easy, but we set that expectation at the beginning of the meeting. So again, thanks, Brene Brown. You're amazing. I think that we could use retros to be more rumble-like, thinking about process, working styles, expectations. Are we aligned on these things? Maybe using the survey data as an honest look at how you're doing as a team. These are some tools I think that you can put in place as a leader to rethink meetings. And I think this idea of rethinking can really start to be pretty powerful as you start to look at things that have been in place for a long time that maybe you haven't looked at. Are they necessary? Could this be at a better time? Could this be a different style? It's important that we look at things like that and have an open mind. Another thing we can do, this gets back to that exponential growth piece that I was talking about a little bit earlier. So imagine enacting a growth mindset towards every single employee that you manage or every single teammate that you have. We got to remember, this teammate in their current state, they're not going to be who they will be in 3 months, tomorrow, but even more in 6 months, in a year. Via encouragement, feedback, ultimately quite a bit of failure, this person and thus this team will grow. If we look at this with a growth mindset, this is what I mean by exponential growth. We don't know how much someone can grow in a few days versus a few months, but if we take a growth mindset to the idea of their development, then there really is no limitation to what a team can accomplish. I think one of the ways that you can do this is you can play to developers' strengths. Give them a level of autonomy with which they can work with in choosing the stories that they work on. The more that they enjoy the work and build their strengths, the more likely they are to stay at this company, stay on this team. This is straight out of Harvard Business Review article that I read this weekend. Some research that was done on employee retention at Facebook. I encourage you to take a look at it. It was a collection of authors. Adam Grant was one, and then the head of people at Facebook, and then 2 other people at Facebook. But This is what they found. If we give employees autonomy to work on the things they want to work on, not only are they more productive, but they stay longer. Another thing to think about is not every developer on your team should be expected to be a leader or practice daring leadership, be incredibly courageous, or be overly ambitious. You have to let people leave work at work and know that work is not all that they care about and all that they do. If we let people leave work at work, they're more likely to come back, and not just come back, but come back energized and wanting to be at work. Another thing it's important for engineering leaders to do is define your working style. So we talked a little bit about this already, but this actually applies to everyone at every level on the team, from junior developer to VP. You got to define how you work best with others. What works for you, what doesn't work for you, where your boundaries are. And then you need to hold yourself and those around you accountable to what that working agreement is. So at Turing, we call this a DTR, which stands for define the relationship. It's the first thing teams do, students do when they get a project and they're working with new people. They have to do this DTR to really kind of like set the norms of the team and establish their working styles. We do this as instructors within mod teams. We switch around quite a bit. So when we haven't worked with some other instructors, this is great for us to do, to also define our working styles. And it's important. Another thing that goes into defining your working style is also this idea of setting clear and reasonable expectations for the team. And once you've defined your working style, staying in your lane of that working style. You can't be an expert on everything. You can't get everything done. You got to delegate to the phenomenal team that you've hired. Are you hands-on? Can we as developers expect you to dive into the code base, PRs, reviewing them, sprint planning? Or would you rather delegate those responsibilities and focus your time supporting others via discussion, mission alignment, encouragement? Another thing that I would encourage for engineering leadership is you can't hold the team to the same standards that you hold yourself to. It's unreasonable, right? You are just committed more than, a developer that's only been with the team for a few months. If you are the director, a manager, VP, you can't hold everyone to the same standard you hold yourself to. And this is something that I've had to learn over the years in all aspects, not just in engineering, but in my personal life as well. Another thing to think about is we got to treat people like the adults that they are. And we have to set clear and reasonable boundaries. People have to know where our boundaries are, what behavior is okay, what behavior is not okay. And this is really always going to come top down. Switching gears a little bit, something I think is super important is this idea of committing to feedback, right? So one of the things we do at Turing is I ask for feedback on every individual class that I have the privilege to deliver to students. We also ask students to give us feedback as a module team, as a group of instructors every single week. And it matters because we adjust, we iterate, we improve. And more importantly than all of this, we show students that we're listening. Students know they have a voice here. And what results out of this is no module, no class really ever looks the exact same ever, because we're constantly pivoting, we're constantly taking in feedback and adjusting. I think when it comes to feedback, you've got to be present for the one-on-ones that you set up to deliver this feedback. You can't try and split your attention. There's no better way for you to show me you actually don't care about what I'm saying than for your attention to be split in the middle of a one-on-one. Now, I get it, critical things come up, but this should be the exception, not the rule. Active listening, one of the most essential ingredients for building trust. And I think when it comes to feedback, we've got to set some norms around both anonymous and formal feedback. There's got to be a place where employees can feel empowered to submit anonymous feedback about problems that are going on with the team. You could call it a problem box, right? Employees are encouraged to contribute to this problem box as they see fit. And this is part of that risk taking, right? Both of these, both the anonymous feedback and the formal feedback, you got to take it seriously. And you have to publicly address this feedback when you receive some critical feedback yourself. How are you working on it? Thank people. Remember, feedback's a gift, right? Thank you for giving me this feedback. Here's how I'm working on it, and here's why it's important to me, and here's what I expect to happen now that I'm aware of it. When you give great feedback and you create an environment that is grounded in psychological safety, you will receive, as even the leadership, you'll receive the gift of feedback as well. If you do it well and if you give it well, you will receive it well. Another thing I think that's important is we model this idea of daring leadership, right? If we are going to be the leadership, we need to show people what developer empathy looks like, what empathy really looks like. So one of the ways that you can do that, you can start with humility as well. You got to own mistakes, right? You got to tell the team when you've made them and what you've learned from them. Again, you've got to ask team members individually, what does support look like from you? And you have to define what support looks like for you. Remembering and recognizing that we have a whole person here. They are not just their job title. They are not just the work that they produce. You need to know the whole person in order to care about the whole person. You can't do it any other way. You've got to be able to collaborate with team members and gather input before making big decisions. You just hand out decisions and big changes without gathering input from the team, it's just not going to go well. The more transparency that you can build into the process of making big decisions, large engineering decisions, such as adding third-party software, right? Adjusting the roadmap, prioritizing features. So we've got to add transparency there so that the engineering team knows what's going on and what to expect. I think that these are great places when we have a big decision looming for a rumble, right? Like everyone comes in, we know we're going to have different ideas, different approaches, but we're going to, find out why we think a certain way, right? And everybody on the team gets a voice. Yeah, and I think keeping the same transparency when you're in the decision-making process as when the decision is ultimately made, right? You have to describe the process in detail of why a decision was made. And this will increase buy-in from the team. Buy-in will increase with increased transparency. So some other things we can do is, as engineering leaders, is set up some reminders that ask ourselves, what can I do today to empower, engage, and ultimately facilitate growth within the team, knowing that time is finite, right? Like maybe once a day, you're like, hey, I need to bring awareness to this idea that I am a support system, and let's spend 30 minutes today supporting the team and remembering that my words matter and I can empower and I can engage if I set that intention. And a great way to do that is just a daily reminder. Hey, at this time of day, I'm gonna kind of like focus in on how I'm supporting the team. You got to remind yourself to also ask developers what support looks like for them, especially on these big days, these high stakes days, release days, planning days, etc. You have to kind of like let the team know that you've got their backs and encourage them to use their voice to tell you what support looks like today, right? Because it could look different depending on the current context. And then you've ultimately got to be reminding the team of the big picture. You have to bring them back to the mission and ask them leading questions about whether we're getting closer to that mission. And you have to be open to that feedback. You have to be open to the fact that not every member of the team may feel like we're getting closer to the mission or we got closer to the mission during the last sprint. But how can we improve? How can we get better at that? Another thing that I think is pretty important that we talk about, not as much as we should, is this idea of building in joy, right? Like, we have to build this in. It's part of why we go to work, right? If we can't enjoy the work, we're not going to keep showing up. I think you need to empower the team to have a voice in what joy looks like every day. And it's probably not another Zoom meeting. I think we can be more creative than that. And I think that you need to share things with the team that bring you joy, right? Whether it's related to work or not. And this is all really part of creating that space for people to be their whole selves at work. You can also have fun in a virtual space, right? You've got all these weird effects that exist within different platforms, right? And I can have fun with these, right? Like, I was a potato the other day when I showed up for a meeting. And so tying it all together, why this matters, why it matters so much as someone within a leadership position is, again, you can't expect your subordinates to practice empathy unless you are modeling that behavior from the top down. That's how culture's set. And it's never going to work bottom up in a hierarchical structure. It just isn't. So I can't tell my students to create space for the quieter group members during breakout rooms or project work time unless I'm actively modeling that behavior by creating that space and asking for a diverse collection of perspectives in my own classroom. Right? I can't ask students not to talk over one another when I'm not around if I'm talking over them during class or interrupting them during their questions. As a leader, you have to lead with empathy from the front. And you got to make it a core tenet of your processes on a daily basis in order for it to permeate to the developer level. All right, so switching gears just a little bit. What does this look like as a developer? Daily practices as a developer. Hopefully this comes as no surprise to you all in this community, but we always have to write tests, right? Because when you don't have full test coverage, your code is broken. This is a fact. The only thing up for debate is how long it will be until someone finds out that your code is broken. Tests are going to help us document how a piece of functionality is intended to work. When you test for edge cases, it shows that you have empathy for the mistakes that your user will inevitably make. Write those tests. Another thing we can do, review our own PRs, right? I took the time to care about this code. I don't just expect others on my team to catch my mistakes. I start this conversation in line where it matters in order to lower the lift of the reviewer who is likely more senior than I am if they're reviewing my code. I add screenshots, which is great, sometimes helpful, but better yet, I can add a screencast that demonstrates functionality. Yeah, so here you can see me recording a screencast right here on the PR and adding some life, some voice to this PR. This is something that I think we should all be doing. You know, remote life presents unique challenges that lack human interaction. This is one way that we can humanize this process of writing and reviewing code, right? Another thing is non-technical employees love these demo videos. They don't love these PR review videos. But if you're demoing some code, a feature that you just wrote, this can be something that they can all look at and understand. So if you're adding a screencast of the functionality to your PR, then anyone that's non-technical, but that also might like get updates on PRs and be tracking stories, now they have a window into what this looks like, and they can relay that to customers. They're going to feel more connected to the product and to the changes because they're trained on how to use these features or these fixes, and they can train the customers. Really, the power of video, the power of screencasting, I can't emphasize it enough. And when this habit becomes a team norm, right? All developers are putting screencasts for PRs, for functionality. It really does speed up the development lifecycle quite a bit. This idea of asking for help, we're going to dive in a little bit here. This is a skill I consistently tell students. It's a skill that they need to think about intentionally and that they need to develop. Let me first say that without psychological safety, developers will stay in what we call unproductive struggle longer than they need to, right? They'll take a lot longer to reach out because they're viewing reaching out for help as a risk that they don't want to take. Oh my gosh, they're going to know how much I don't know. What do I do? Psychological safety is paramount for creating an environment where a developer even feels that they can ask for help. Now, there is another extreme here, and that extreme is asking for help too much. So that's going to be on team members, senior developers to decide, hey, you need to go look this up on your own versus, oh, you have a clear misunderstanding of how this system works or how this problem is indeed working or not working. And let me sit down and take some time to tell you about that. Now that's going to be at your discretion, and both scenarios are going to need to be navigated with grace and with some empathy. One of the ways, if we are asking for help, that as developers, we can present the lightest lift for the people that we're asking, right? If we're doing it in a channel, and really encourage those people, make the likelihood of us getting a response as high as it can be. You got to add in context, and it's got to be as succinct and simple as possible. Once again, this is a skill. We're going to be developing this. But I'm going to go back to this idea of a screencast, right? A screencast of you running into the problem, working in your editor, working in the terminal, whatever it is, that can add such context that really the written medium has no way of adding. We need to see it sometimes. As you type out your message that is asking for help, this may sound obvious, but rereading your message before you hit send. Reread the message. You may realize you left out some context. You may realize there's something you haven't tried. You might realize you have typos. Best case scenario, you might realize, hey, this process of talking it out, of recording the screencast, of typing what my problem is and really defining that problem, this helped me realize that I haven't tried to solve it in a certain way, and maybe I can go solve it just by doing that process before I even ask for help. This is obviously ideal, but and it doesn't always happen. Shouldn't expect it to happen all the time, but it can happen. As part of this message, we've got to state all the things we've tried. We've got to articulate where our understanding of the problem breaks down. I expect this, I'm getting this, here's what I've tried, here's what I think I know, here's where I need help. The more specific you can be about where your understanding breaks down, the faster someone can jump in and help. This saves everyone time. It avoids the dev that's trying to help you offer solutions that have already been attempted. It's another great process for poking holes in your own problem solving. And it could lead you down a road that you haven't taken yet, right? This just this idea of typing it out. It can really help you define your problem, which sometimes can lead you to your own solution. I can't tell you how many times I have been typing a message and I realize that I can go solve this problem that I'm typing out on my own. It happens daily. It really does. So this kind of attention to detail, clarity, it's going to help members of your team understand how much you care, how thorough your process is, and ultimately it's going to build trust because they know that if they're giving you their precious time, then that time will not be wasted. Pairing. Yes, this idea of pairing. All right. I'm not going to make it go the whole time. When you're a more seasoned developer, dedicating some time every week to pair with some junior developers. Part of the reason I encourage this is because I know at Turing, I need to see their bad habits in action in order to help them correct them, right? I have to watch them code. If I don't watch them code, I'll never understand what habits are, hindering them or where their process could be improved. And as a senior, you're going to have far more context around the code base and the problems that they're attempting to solve. And most likely someone's helped you many times along the way for you to get where you're at. We got to pay it forward as developers. Knowledge silos are going to hinder productivity. At some point, we were reaching up, right? And now it's time to reach back. Something that you can do as well is when you're responding to a question, link to a previous PR so that a junior can have the context about why a certain decision was made, or hey, this problem has come up before, take a look at this PR so that you can have some more context. And I think another thing to focus on when you're pairing as the lead or the senior developer is you need to be specific with your technical communication and then press them to improve upon theirs. When they're saying stuff, thing, they can't put a technical word to something that does have a technical definition. We got to push them to use that technical language to be more clear. All right, so beyond pairing, what are some higher level practices that we can implement as we develop our careers? Again, back to this idea of defining our working style. As developers, we need to define our needs. We need to take the time to define what support looks like from our teammates, from our manager, from the executive level. This is empathetic behavior because you're helping others understand how to best work with you. And we have to continue to advocate for our needs. We have to. Another thing that we should do is challenge our own assumptions around code. You have to open yourself up to rethinking, especially around code and coding concepts. You got to say, I'm not here to prove myself, but rather to improve myself. I'm not here to affirm my beliefs, but rather to help them evolve as I learn more and more. We need to commit individually to getting it right rather than being right. This industry changes way too fast to bind yourself to one way of solving problems or one pattern, one way to build applications, one framework to work in. Another thing we have to build in and we have to advocate for is human time. Remote can become lonely. I'm not saying anything I'm not telling you anything you don't know at this point after a year of quarantine. You have to remember that you are more than the code you produce, and so are your teammates. In order to be our whole self at work, we have to share some parts of ourselves that exist outside work with those people that we work with. And we need to see our coworkers for the whole humans that they are. Back to this idea of pairing. So as a more junior developer, you have to ask better developers what they're working on. If you can take some of their time to shadow them and ask questions while they work. Reason to do this is your team is going to be full of knowledge. It's really hard to pinpoint all the things that a developer has in their tool set or in their process or just in their head. So it's on us to ask for that time so that we can extract as much as possible in the limited time that you're working with these humans, right? Teams change rapidly. We don't know how long someone's going to be with us. So while they are with us, it's our job to utilize them as a resource as much as we can. So when we're pairing with another senior, maybe more senior developer, yeah, we're going to be focused on whatever the problem is at hand, but also we need to focus in on the habits and the tools that the more senior developers are implementing as part of their process. We got to steal the great habits from them and build them into our own process. That's how we improve. That's how we level up. Oh, I see you just grepped your entire history from the command line. That's interesting. Can you tell me how you did that? Or do you mind sending me that snippet in a Slack message? Oh, I see you're using an alias there. How'd you set that? And what does that alias do? You're navigating your environment really quickly. How'd you go about learning and implementing all of these shortcuts into part of your workflow? These are questions that we can ask, right, to improve ourselves. And they're questions that most senior developers will be happy to share because they know that this is going to speed you up. It's going to speed up your ability to produce. One more time, I feel like this is part of what this community is built on, lifting one another up. So I wanted to show this one. Yeah, I want to say thank you. Thanks for coming to my talk. Thanks for listening. I really hope you engage with me in the Q&A or even outside of the conference. I'm at Timo Mitchell on most social media mediums. And yeah, I encourage you to really think about developer empathy. Take some intentional thought. What can you do to encourage these practices within your own team? Hopefully you've got some tools to do that. And yeah, once again, thanks so much.